Live to Fight is the type of company that Dana killed. It's a homegrown. It's a guy that just does good work and puts it out there. And if you can support him, you really should, because he's precisely a guy who can't. His banners may not be able to hang on to UFC because he hasn't been able to pay them $100,000 to get his stuff out there. That's the corporate stuff that we're talking about now with the UFC. That they've made everything at that level where it's all about money for them. And Live to Fight is a dude that does good work, makes you a great banner, and doesn't have $100,000 to get on the UFC and stuff, and deserves support. So any fighter out there, anybody out there, owner of a gym or anything like that listens to us, God bless you and thank you very much for your support. And extend that to Live to Fight, because he's one of us. Those guys are one of us.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drew with High Fight IQ, and you are now watching the MMA Conspiracy Hour with my boys Todd Adkins and Miguel Iturrate. Miguel has been the matchmaker for over 200 shows worldwide and has worked with Hook and Shoot, Euphoria, Bodog, and ADCC. Make sure you subscribe to the Todd Adkins Show on YouTube. You can also find Miguel on his YouTube channel at MMA Collector 74. Don't forget to subscribe to High Fight IQ on all social media platforms. The House Call Sports on YouTube, the Fight Pit on YouTube. Now let's talk some fights, baby. Let's go.
All right, so it's Todd Atkins here. I'm with Miguel Iturrate, and I'm going to do MMA Conspiracy Hour here, and we're going to discuss the UFC settlement. I know that a lot of people have been on this for the past, I don't know, few weeks. We really didn't touch on it much, although we did have one of the lawyers on our show more than once, and so we did have some insight to it. But I think having had the time to look over it, and for Miguel to research a little bit, I think we have some good things to discuss. And as always, I want to thank our sponsors, Bet Stamp and Live to Fight Design. And Miguel, just kind of want to let you start out with kind of your opening thoughts on the settlement.
I think my overwhelming feeling is like that the air got let out of the balloon. That it's just now like a sad, droopy balloon going down. And, especially when the fighters get their checks and stuff, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to be holding much, much less than life-changing money. And, you kind of had a feeling that you kind of hope that they maybe get enough money that, might change their lives. Even $100,000 might help people pay a mortgage or, buy a house if they're renting, or, who knows what types of situations people are in. And, some people in the, for example, in the second part of the lawsuit, some people are going to get $5,000. It put in perspective, Dana White bets 15 times more than that every hand of blackjack that he plays. If you take 75,000 as his usual betting hand, and he usually, walks into a casino with $1 million to bet. That's the word out there. By comparison, the settlement is less than Ari Emanuel's compensation for a year, and they have a couple of executives that make about the same as the settlement every year. Again, the middlemen and the non-fighters are still taking home the majority of the money. The key to this settlement, to this lawsuit, was always to go at the UFC and make sure that they change their business practices. And they didn't even come close to doing that. In fact, they capitulated immediately when money was thrown. I don't see a negotiation process where the UFC said, okay, here's 335. And somebody went back and said, no, make it $1 billion or we go to court. Maybe some back and forth went through. Maybe the UFC's first thing was 200, million, and they got it up to 335 in the negotiations and stuff. But right off the bat, the amount of money that is, and forget what the lawyers are going to make, because that's also another sticking point where, the UFC corporation makes all the money, and now with this lawsuit, the lawyers and the suits are making the majority of the money, or will take home the largest cuts of this money, larger than any of the fighters. And that, philosophically doesn't sit well. I mean, I know that they've sacrificed an incredible amount, and that also lawyers' fees are pretty standard. So 30% or around there. It's not like, these lawyers should say, oh, for this one, we'll just take 15. That doesn't happen. So they just did their job, but they knew they were getting there. So now this begs one question to me that I haven't gotten a clear answer from anybody, or seen it anywhere out there, is how was the decision to accept this settlement reached? Did the lawyers pick up the phone, call all 1,100 fighters and go, A or nay, A or nay? And somebody's, at a chalkboard, A, nay, A, nay, It's like, oh, well, the A's won. How was the decision to take a settlement that is paltry? How was that decision come to? Because if the lawyers made the decision, I like Bob. He's come on our podcast, but many other lawyers wouldn't have even given us a chance. And he faced the music, and he's also a guy that trained and was a fan, and had athleticism in his family, and
He was back around when we were the back. He's one of the old school.
Yeah, he was. Gerald Streben and his whole story with the being KO'd and then charging him for his brain scan and things like that was the initial thing that made Bob wonder. And that hints at a guy that at some point cared, but again, he's going to be the richest person it's like Dana's the richest person from the game, and he's going to be the richest person from this settlement. And that's the kind of thing where there's something's wrong in the whole philosophy of these types of things. But he sacrificed, he did the work. You know what I mean? The fighters did the work in the ring before. So we'll put the 120 million going to the lawyers aside, even though a lot of people aren't going to like that either. So now that leaves 225 million. Why was that not requested to be more? The UFC could have parted with $1 billion. And they did what they normally would do. Maisie actually said that what they would do is they would take your take a fighter who had a pay-per-view share on his show. They would say, hey, give us back the pay-per-view share and we'll just front you $4 million, And then so the fighter made 11 million, they get to keep the 11 million. So they've always been going ahead and playing games with the money and borrowing money. And they also took out huge loans so that the UFC also could say, well, we're paying back loans. But those loans went as payments, to the big guys. So they always have known how to manipulate and play with the money. And here the UFC's already wiped this loss from their books. They could easily have paid $1 billion. And were they asked for more money in the settlement? Why was that? And again, that's the key, is when the push came to shove, my expectation was, especially with the idea of business practices being changed, my expectation was that you would push back with a huge amount of money, say 225, try coming back with 10 times that. And let the UFC worry a little bit about going to court. There were some signals about how court might or might not go for him. If you consider the fact that, some of their witnesses or some of the fighters that might speak in their name were not going to be allowed to testify, I think, they had taken some losses at the hands of the judge. And it was some idea that there might be a favorable way of handling this, once they got to court. Once they got to court, the UFC would be very much at risk of looking bad. Now, somebody's read some of the emails and some of the documentation that's out there, but they didn't want to do discovery. Why? Because they have 10 years worth of emails. But that's the key. Somebody should actually have sat and done the homework so that the case could be proven that they are a monopoly, that they do. The Cage and Johnson part of the lawsuit, one of the dividing factors there obviously was that at that point, the UFC had added a clause to the contracts that said you really can't sue us, a waiver. And the fighters signed it, or else they don't fight, or else they don't make money. And that became a deciding factor for some of the fighters to make less money in the settlement. The one of the clauses that should have been one of the first things brought up in court as why the UFC's business practices are illegal was now used against the fighters themselves to limit the amount of pay that they're going to get. So there's a lot of stuff that sticks in your craw and makes you wonder, how were these decisions made? Was it by vote, the fighters? Because then at that point, most of them wanted some money, even if it was small money, But was it a vote? They took the money and now they're like, hey, you're going to get $5,000. The guy is like, hey, I want my vote back.
Yeah, I mean, if you're only getting $5,000, what's the point of him being part of it?
Yeah. $5,000. I mean, if you make $5,000 a month, you're making about $60K a year. That's lower middle class right in that neighborhood, So in other words, if you have a house mortgage, you've paid your bills for a month with that, and then the money's gone forever. You could buy yourself a good used Chevy.
And they had to wait 10 years to get that.
Yeah. So some guys hopefully will make more. Like I said, if you take the 225 billion and you divide it by the 1,100 fighters, if you just divide it evenly like that, each fighter would get 200,000. So there are going to be some fighters that are probably going to get $1 million or thereabouts at the expense of some of the other fighters, but it doesn't matter. But Kung Lee might take home a couple $1,000,000 and hopefully the life of some of these fighters will change. But the UFC, this lawsuit absolutely did not have the effect that, the people that were poo-pooing it and nothing will happen and things like that, they were absolutely right. The lawsuit had the potential to threaten some of what the UFC does, but at the end of the day, none of it came to fruition. And the UFC, I think the movie was called Passenger 57, where Wesley Snipes said, always bet on black. Always bet on Dana White. Always bet on white. That's because if you look at it throughout this whole process of the lawsuit, Dana never flinched. Dana never appeared worried. Dana included, if you look at the different classes of the lawsuit, Dana always doubled down on his own business practices, his own way of doing things. He's in a recent interview saying he's the only expert in the world. But adding that waiver that you cannot even sue us anymore. So it's like, yeah, even if we screw you, and you can't really sue us anymore. If you want to fight for us, and if you don't agree to not sue us, then you won't fight for us. Adding that while the lawsuit was already materialized, the Part A and stuff like that, is clearly doubling down on your business practices and showing no regard or no worry that anything was ever going to change. And again, the evidence, the circumstantial evidence, the stories from the fighters and stuff, the ones that are gathered, once you start to add them up, there is, some evidence that some of the business practices were, bordering on monopoly, bordering on, in that neighborhood. So, but always bet on white. Dana hasn't lost in 20 years except for a power slap.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to sound like a simpleton and just say, "Oh, it didn't come out the way we hoped," but you're right. It just feels like nothing really changed other than the fact that they had to pay out this money.
The business practices. I've interviewed John Fitch. John Fitch is an incredibly focused and smart guy when it came to this lawsuit. He was into the details. He understood the details of what was going on, and he understood that the business practices would have to be changed. When we talked to Bob Mazie said that going after changing business practices was definitely something that they wanted to do.
A sticking point.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
And so when the UFC said, "Hey, we're not changing anything. Here's some money," how was the decision to accept that money and end the thing come to? That's really important.
Yeah,
And
I'm pretty sure he said on our show that they wouldn't accept a settlement that didn't include it. I'm pretty sure of that.
I agree with you that he hinted at that. I think that what's not clear is how the decision comes to, because I think the lawyers are at the end of the day hired by clients and should be doing what the clients want.
Mm-hmm.
So if the fighters made the mistake to say, "I take the money," and the lawyer said, "Okay, let's do it because I'm going to get paid now and go off and buy a nice house and take a couple of years off because I'm tired of this," I wouldn't blame him anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but how was that decision? I think that the hint there was that it's not Bob's decision completely. So the lawyers weren't but one of the things that is documented out there now is that the lawyers did decide how some of the money is going to be split in the Johnson case. And that decision the lawyers made there excluded foreign fighters and excluded fighters that had signed the waiver. So how does Cajun Johnson feel when he stopped his MMA career at 35? He had taken 2 losses in a row, but he'd been on a 5-fight winning streak before that. And I know Cajun because he's from Bill Mahood's hometown up in Canada, and I think he's relocated to Vegas now. But I know Cajun Johnson. Cajun Johnson's a pretty good fighter. He may have had a couple more fights, a couple more paydays he squeezed in there, but he lent his name to the lawsuit. And now he's going to get $5,000. So, like I said, you can go to the used car lot and maybe pick up a 2008 Chevy. Maybe 2005. I don't know how cars values are anymore, really up in the States and stuff, but you could buy a used car with $5,000. You can pay your bills for a month. If you're an average person, a mortgage, send your kids to school, buy them clothes every day, buy the food, pay the electric bill, the cable bill, gas in your car, gas in that Chevy.
Yeah.
So the 5,000 for each guy getting 5,000 is borderline insulting. And if it was a vote of the fighters that decided to accept the settlement, and any of the guys getting 5,000 voted, "Let's just get the money," I'm sure every one of them is regretting that vote. But that's not something that's clear here. How was the decision to accept the settlement reached? That's the paramount question in my mind is who made the decision? How was it reached? Was it by voting of the fighters, or was it some other method? Were the fighters pressured in any way by anybody to, we're really not going to do much better in this, it's like, or we're going to be in court for 5 years still, and we're 5 years away from grabbing money. It's like, yeah, but we've already been at this 10 years. The idea here was that waiver is illegal and should never have been allowed in there, and the UFC should be forced to take it out of their contracts. Now, they're going back and they're like, "Well, guess what? We saved some money. We don't have to change the contract anymore." So those lawyers sitting in the office thinking, if we lose this, we're going to have to restructure and write a new contract. At least we can bill. They don't. That's a job loss that the lawyers aren't going to make money for.
They also
So
put the sunset clauses back in,
yeah,
which originally they had taken out when the lawsuit was filed or somewhere down the line, but then they put that back in. So it's like you said, doubling down, no doubt about it.
always bet on white.
Yeah.
Always bet on white. I mean, the guy, like I said, the guy is a force of nature. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. There's the guy's energy and ability to just confront, be abrasive. He was always abrasive from the very beginning, and that was one thing that was held against him when he was very young. But he's actually really never changed. Now, sometimes we've said, okay, he's a little more mellow than back in the old days, and every once in a while you'll hear him at this point on things that used to probably get his goat and stuff say, I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? But because he's been in the battlefield and in the trenches for so long, and he's such a hardened, executive at this point, that you'd be a fool to bet against him. And the people who were, on the internet or on the boards or in the rhetoric, some people are like, "Oh, this law," even including myself. I think the lawsuit played out in court still had the potential to prove that they need to change their business practices. There were a lot of people that said it's never going to come to that. Don't worry, nothing's going to change. You're dumb if you think that. And guess what? Those people were all right. Those guys bet on white.
Yeah. It's a wild thing to think about because we thought, I think a lot of people thought this is going to change things. And
yeah, no, here's the
yeah.
thing is the fighters are getting money. Some money is going out. Let's not even deal with the nuts and bolts of how much money or anything like that. So the fighters got their money. They get some money. Who won this lawsuit?
UFC, without question.
Yeah, the UFC. This was, and because they did it with no court or anything like that, this was a victory on the level of McGregor versus Jose Aldo.
Yeah, I think they'd be over the moon with, we'll give up money as long as we don't have to change our business practices. That no problem.
Yeah, and again, when we talked about it, a corporation with $20 billion in value, $1 billion would have made, at least that $5,000 minimum, since there's 200,000 in there, at least that $5,000, 200 million being split up. If it was $1 billion, the minimum each fighter would be getting is 20 something. You can maybe help out with the bills for half a year, or sock it away in a bank account, maybe invest, 20,000 sounds a lot better than 5,000. But it doesn't even seem like there was a negotiation or a request to say, hey, 335, can we up that a little bit? The UFC got everything that they wanted out of the lawsuit. When that settlement went through, I would love to have been a fly on the wall in, Ari Emanuel and Dana and Hunter and all those guys is they must have had a high five meeting, laughing and all the way to the bank.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
So yeah, that's and again, that's the disappointment of it, because the business practices are going to stay the same. So they're not going to be forced to pay out more to the fighters than 20% of the revenue. So as long as the UFC's, steamroller of a machine is going through, again, the lawyers, the executives, and non-fighters will be making the most money from the sport on the backs of the fighters. It's kind of the way it's always been in the fight game. When you go back to boxing in those days and stuff like that, the promoters, the middlemen, even the mafiosos and things like that, they all make more money than the fighters.
Yeah.
And, in the NBA and in the NFL and stuff, at least that's come to the point where, they say, okay, this is the total pot and 51% or whatever goes to the players. And that's why, when revenue goes up, the NBA salary cap goes up because there's more money in the 51% now. So it goes up and, they're measuring it that way. The UFC doesn't have anybody looking at that, measuring that. None of that is a factor at all. And they're going to just keep doing what they want. So, yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the settlement, is just that my hat's off to all those people that were at least, I don't know, savvy enough, sarcastic enough to realize that Dana was going to win this. You kind of, it's like you kind of, I, from a legal standpoint, still think that if it was played out in court with a judge, depending on how the judge, sees details and things like that. And I don't know if it would be a jury on these types of things, maybe not. But the UFC does have points where they could be made to look bad, but none of them are even going to be blown up or come to light because the UFC took care of it by throwing a little bit of money at it. And that's all it is. It's just a little bit of money for them. Yeah. Dana, if Dana's value, net worth is correct on the internet, he's worth $500 million, right? That's one of the numbers you see. And those things are up and down and not perfect, but let's just assume that he's worth $500 million, right? He made it off the backs of the fighters for the last 20 years. And he could pay the settlement out of his own pocket and still have $150 million.
Yeah.
Of course, it would hurt, right? You don't want to lose, 60% of your money or whatever like that. But so the amount of money, I don't want to say he stole from the fighters in the last few years. The fighters were all complicit when the contracts were there, but he's been pocketing money the whole time. And the amount of money he's grabbed for himself over the last few years is less than he's given, than they've given to 1,100 fighters that stepped up and said, "Hey, we deserve more." Man, guess what? They still deserve more, even after the settlement. So those are my questions for Bob Mazey. Is what was the process to decide that we will accept the settlement right here? That's tantamount right now. That's information that hasn't been made clear. And I think it's really important to ask that question, just to see. Because I think that if it was a vote of the fighters, that there are going to be some fighters, obviously, afterwards who are going to say, I made a mistake. Fuck. That's on them. They didn't think it through. But we did speak about this. The business practices, I did mention that, actually, that I was like, once the UFC throws money, and I always talked about the settlement money being much bigger than the settlement money they got. But I said, once the UFC throws money at this, you'll see the business practices become much less important. We're on record as saying that in the older podcasts, that's for sure. And again, if you've got a fighter who's, at the end of the day, it's like, look, he talks to the lawyers, he figures it out, based on formulas. He goes, man, I'm going to get maybe 140 grand out of this. And I could really use that. My shoulder, stem cells. I can, get a couple of stem cell treatments and, take care of my, put my kid in private school. I don't like him in public school, and take care of a few things with 140,000. So I vote to take the money, and are there, any fighters at that point? Maybe Fitch is the philosopher here in my book, right? Maybe Fitch calls him up and be like, dude, we got to hold the line. But they broke. If this was the UFC's or the fighters voting to accept the settlement, they broke, and they broke. I don't want to say they broke bad. They broke stupid.
That's it.
They didn't see it coming this way, And so, and like I said, you could tell by Dana's renewed smugness,
Yeah.
um, yeah, and Dana is a guy, like I said, always bet on white. You can put that as the title of this thing.
Yeah, I'm
Always bet
going
on
to.
white, because the bottom line is he's the guy who's now, being asked about politics and about, cultural issues and this, and he's now a voice. And yeah, you know, nobody used to ask, Paul Tagliabue what he thought of these things, or, the commissioners or any of the sports figures. I mean, sometimes the players became involved in politics and gave us their opinions and stuff like that. But a lot of times that was them saying things in the media or whatever. Dana is called out and brought onto podcasts so that we can hear what he has to say. So, like I said, this guy, aside from Power Slap, and he won't admit Power Slap is a loss, but aside from Power Slap, this guy hasn't lost in 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to end on, the breaking stupid and hasn't lost in 20. Yeah, I mean it's going to be interesting to see, in November if it go ahead and goes through and everything. But
yeah, now
I want to know, just like you, how are these decisions made and what was the number and all this?
Yeah, and here's the only other thing to add is that I do believe that Maisie and these guys maybe change business practice and things like that. But I think if there's enough proof or enough evidence of a potential monopoly, that some, I don't know if it's the FBI or some agencies like that, some federal agency could start an investigation, look into it further. And that's how breaking monopolies happens. But we don't really see much evidence of that. You know what I mean? Obviously, a lot of that stuff happens behind the scene, but I don't have a lot of faith that that's happened.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always bet on white.
Well, I want to give you a chance to kind of tell us what you got coming up on the MMA Collector 74 YouTube.
Well, I'm excited. I've got probably the next 6 interviews scheduled, and some of them are very interesting, including a couple of groundbreaking ones. Like I tend to interview obviously retired and historic figures, and I think that I'm going to be able to land excuse me, my first interview of a second generation fighter. So someone's son who's fighting right now and is still active is going to come on and do the interview. And I'm excited about that because it's just something new and something different,
Mm-hmm.
And it's a kid, I guess I can call him that, right? It's a kid I don't know, but he's going to do me the honor, and it's going to be a lot of fun because you get to see. I think you'll see a little bit of a difference on how the game has evolved and and things like that. And I think I've already gotten a sense from him that he's just really savvy on all kinds of fronts and things like that. Talk about everything from like he lives on an organic farm and doesn't eat anything that they don't grow there or anything like that. I mean, something about Tank Abbott tells me that he didn't live on an organic farm and cared much about what he put in his body. So yeah, I think I'm about to explore a whole new level with that interview, and then I'm gonna go back to some old school guys. I got one of Eddie Alvarez's old opponents that I had booked coming on, who's a guy with 50 fights on his record. So I mean, I'm excited, and of course the me and you are gonna have to get together soon to do another one of our classic fights.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, we always ask people to contribute the dog rescue. I always let them talk about this, so it's something that is important. Maybe update us on that.
Well, like I said, it's business as usual, really, with that. Uh, we've got a couple of dogs that Ashley has there that, she's got 70 dogs that, a handful of them are adoptable that, even then people don't adopt older dogs and stuff like that all the time. So she's capped out. Um, when some of the dogs are, kind of have a job at the animal shelter. Mingo and Whiskey in particular are two of the dogs that she would meet new dogs with just to see how sociable they are with other dogs because of their temperament. Mingo and Whiskey are not aggressive or anything like that, and they're wonderful little dogs. And Whiskey's got tumors in his heart. Mingo's got a condition in his back where he's been paralyzed. So we're losing perhaps in the near future two of the doggies that you count on to help you actually run the thing. So it's just like I said, I've said it before, it's good for the soul. This job, this work, it's not a job, but it's work. But yeah, the tragedies outweigh the victories at times, and that wears on you sometimes. So
Yeah.
anyway, if anybody could throw a couple bucks on there, it'd be outstanding, and go to a good cause. But we'll be here anyway.
Yeah, and we have all this down in the show notes. If you look, you'll see the links. And as always, Miguel, appreciate your input. Everybody support Miguel's channel, MMA Collector 74. Subscribe to these channels, ours and his, and check out this stuff. Miguel puts a lot of time in, as do I, and yeah, we just appreciate it. Check out the memberships. I got a 99-cent membership. I chose the cheapest one if you want to sign up for it.
And today's Memorial Day. Tomorrow's interview that debuts at the MMA Collector is Hawaiian legend J.R. Palmer.
Yeah,
that Todd helped me out with doing the interview and stuff. And my hat's off to JR. He's humble now, huh?
yeah,
He used to be pretty bombastic, but he's obviously a good man who's been through a lot. And when you look at his record on SureDog, and he's got 40-something fights. When we asked him, he said he's probably got 200. So he paid his dues well beyond that, and very proud of the interview, and he was very forthcoming and very cool. Very, very cool guy.
Yeah. Well, as always, Miguel, I appreciate time, and it's another great discussion. And for everybody that supports this channel, we always appreciate it. And be on the lookout for the next episode.
BetStamp wants to ensure you've maximized your ROI. Line shopping for the best odds matters. And that is why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books. Thankfully, there has never been a better time to get signed up, and they are here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. Using their link, signupexpert.com-TAS, you can get access to all the sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique features. Most importantly, this page automatically connects you to the top promotions at each book, allowing you to start line shopping with an enhanced